Imagine going to your doctor with severe clinical depression, and instead of writing a prescription or, referring you to a specialist, they just look you in the eye and tell you it's your own fault for not being wealthy or successful enough.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's incredibly harsh.
Right. And then they suggest your brain chemistry is actually just a symptom of your weak moral character. I mean, it sounds like a dystopian nightmare.
It really does.
But in certain modern belief systems, this is just standard practice. So, welcome to the deep dive. Our stack of sources today is looking at what happens when faith, which, we usually expect to bring out humility and charity, completely flips into a system of psychological destruction.
We really have a profound and honestly sobering collection of research to sort through today.
Yeah.
We're looking at clinical psychological studies from the UK on mental distress, alongside theological reviews.
Yeah, covering works like Michael Horton's Christless Christianity and Chuck DeGroat's When Narcissism Comes to Church.
Exactly. It's essentially an autopsy of what happens at the intersection of human pathology and theology.
And our mission today is to explore how the human ego can twist faith into this toxic, self-centered system. We are going to map out the psychological damage this inflicts on individuals, especially those already dealing with mental distress.
And then, crucially, uncover the ancient, counterintuitive wisdom these sources suggest is the actual remedy for all of this.
Okay, let's unpack this by looking at a fundamental shift in how people view the divine. It's a concept Burke Parsons outlines in our sources as theological narcissism.
Right. So historically, the perspective of Orthodox Christian theology was that humans exist to serve and reflect the Creator. But theological narcissism reverses that flow entirely.
It flips it upside down.
Completely. It is the human tendency to construct a deity in our own image. So this customized God is specifically engineered to validate the individual's prejudices. It loves whatever you love, it hates whoever you hate, and its primary function in the universe is basically to act as a celestial guarantor of your personal happiness.
It sounds like treating God as a cosmic bellhop, or like a genie in a lamp.
A genie in a lamp is a perfect way to put it.
You just ring the bell when you need a mess cleaned up or a wish granted, but otherwise you want him entirely out of your way.
Sociologist Christian Smith spent years researching this exact phenomenon, and he concluded that it has become the dominant belief system today. He coined the term moralistic therapeutic deism, or MTD.
MTD, right.
The sources break down Smith's 5 core tenets of this modern faith, and they are fascinating to look at closely. First, there is a God who created the world.
Sure. Standard baseline.
Right. Second, this God wants people to be good, nice, and fair to each other, as taught in most world religions.
Okay.
Third, the central overriding goal of life is to be happy and to feel good about oneself.
There's the pivot.
Yep. Fourth, God does not need to be particularly involved in one's life except when needed to resolve a problem.
The cosmic bellhop.
Exactly. And finally, the 5th tenet. Good people go to heaven when they die.
I mean, if you look at those 5 points, they sound perfectly pleasant on the surface.
They do.
But if you dig deeper, they completely remove any sense of awe or surrender, or even the idea that you might need to undergo a painful personal transformation. It basically morphs a historically austere faith into a me-centric self-help seminar.
And this me-centric framework fundamentally changes how people engage with the historical texts of their faith.
Wow.
Michael Horton's critique of that cultural fad from the 1990s, the WWJD, or What Would Jesus Do, bracelets, is a prime example.
Oh man, everybody had one of those.
Right. But Horton argues that while the phrase seems innocent, it actually turns the focus entirely onto human performance and moral effort. It makes the individual the center of the action.
Interesting.
He suggests the bracelets really should have said WDJD. What did Jesus do?
That's a subtle shift, but the implications there are massive.
Oh, absolutely.
Because moving from asking what you would do to what someone else did, it shifts the anchor of the faith away from your own subjective human effort and places it back onto historical objective facts about redemption. If you lose that objective anchor, your faith just becomes a vehicle for self-fulfillment.
And what's fascinating here is if modern faith has removed awe and replaced it with a demand for personal happiness, that creates a really dangerous vacuum at the top of these religious structures.
A vacuum just waiting to be filled.
Right, because who is the perfect person to step into a religion that exists solely to validate the human ego?
A narcissist.
And a narcissist.
Which pulls us right into the work of Chuck DeGroat on narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, within the church.
Hmm.
When most people hear the word narcissism, the immediate image is just someone who loves themselves way too much.
Like staring in a mirror all day.
Exactly. Someone obsessed with their own reflection.
But clinically and psychologically, that is a vast misconception. De Groot draws on cultural historian Christopher Lasch, who defines narcissism not as self-love, but as the longing to be freed from longing.
The longing to be freed from longing. Wow.
It's heavy. Narcissism doesn't stem from an excess of confidence, it stems from a profound deficiency of it. It is rooted in toxic shame, a deep inner emptiness, and an absolute inability to tolerate human limitations and fragility.
So they aren't admiring themselves in the mirror. They are terrified of what is actually underneath. So they stare at a mask they've painted over their own insecurities.
To understand the mechanics of this, de Groot brings in Carl Jung's concept of the shadow self. And he pairs this with a brilliant metaphor from the poet Robert Bly.
The invisible bag, right?
Yes, the long invisible bag that we all drag behind us. Every time we feel a hidden fear, a secret selfish motivation, or deep-seated shame, we shove it into that bag.
Just pack it away.
Exactly. And because the narcissist is mortified at the prospect of opening that bag and looking at their flaws, they construct a grandiose false self to present to the world.
So the mask.
Right. And they require constant, exhausting external validation from everyone around them to prop up that false self, because internally they feel fundamentally defective.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure.
If these individuals are secretly so insecure and terrified of their own limitations, why on earth would they seek out the pulpit?
That is the big question.
Because being a spiritual leader comes with immense pressure, constant scrutiny from a congregation, endless emotional demands. Why would someone running from their own shadow step into the brightest spotlight imaginable?
Well, because the pulpit provides something the narcissistic ego desperately craves. Unchecked authority and a captive audience. Think about it. In many modern organizational structures, a charismatic leader is handed a microphone and essentially told to speak on behalf of the divine every single week.
Nobody can interrupt them.
Exactly. For a narcissist, that level of power, privilege, and adulation acts as an incredibly effective shield against their inner shame. The entire religious system becomes a machine designed to feed their false self.
Reading through de Groot's work, the best way I can visualize this dynamic is like trying to plug a cord into an empty electrical outlet.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You look at the wall, you see the plastic cover, it looks like a fully functioning outlet, but when you plug your cord in, there's absolutely no current.
None at all.
There's no real person behind the facade for you to connect with emotionally.
That profound lack of empathy is a true hallmark of NPD. And the tragedy here is that this pathology doesn't just stay isolated within the leader. It acts like a virus that infects the entire organizational system.
It trickles down.
It absolutely does. De Groot identifies two main types of narcissistic church systems that emerge from this. The first is the grandiose system.
And these are the big ones, right?
Usually, yeah. These organizations are obsessed with metrics, market share, the size of their buildings, and numerical growth. They operate exactly like cutthroat corporate machines.
Like burn and churn.
Precisely. If you burn out while serving their vision, you are immediately discarded.
So if the grandiose system is the cutthroat corporation, what does the other side of the coin look like?
The other side is the vulnerable system, and these are much trickier to spot. They manifest as a sort of collective organizational low self-esteem.
Really? How does that work?
Well, the congregation prides itself on its woundedness and its isolation from the broader culture. They actually wear their lack of growth or success as a badge of spiritual purity.
Oh, so they're the only ones doing it right because they're suffering.
Exactly. They weaponize their victimhood to avoid any external accountability and to fiercely resist any healthy change or feedback.
And to maintain that level of control over you, whether you're in a grandiose or a vulnerable system, these leaders employ some deeply insidious tools. The sources point out how they will take personality typing, like the Enneagram, and use it to identify the 9 faces of narcissism.
Right, proving how this pathology can adapt to literally any personality style, from the aggressive challenger to the passive peacemaker.
And they utilize extreme gaslighting, making you feel crazy or spiritually insecure whenever you notice inconsistencies in their behavior.
They also actively misuse ancient texts to dodge accountability. A classic example cited in the research is the twisting of the Old Testament phrase, touch not the Lord's anointed.
Oh, I've heard that one used a lot.
Yeah, historically, that phrase was used in the context of preventing physical assassination of a king. But modern narcissistic leaders repurpose it to create an impregnable hedge around themselves, just shutting down any legitimate moral or financial questioning.
Just shielding themselves from criticism.
Completely. They also groom cohorts of what they call armor bearers.
Right.
These are subordinates who are expected to show absolute, unquestioning submission to the leader's personal whims, all masquerading as spiritual devotion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If you have a leader who believes they are entitled to success and they need to guarantee their own wealth and status to keep that false self propped up, they need a theological framework to justify their greed.
They do.
So they adopt the prosperity gospel.
The prosperity gospel, or the word of faith movement, is the ultimate transactional theology. Impartially speaking, the mechanics of this belief system assert that physical health, material wealth, and personal success are guaranteed to the believer.
It's a guarantee.
Yes. And the mechanism for unlocking this guarantee involves positive confession, the idea that you can speak reality into existence with your words, and the financial sowing of seeds.
Which is just a metaphor for giving them money.
Right. It translates to giving money directly to the leader's ministry with the expectation of a supernatural return on investment.
It basically turns faith into an ATM.
Yeah.
You punch in the right words, insert your cash, and God is contractually obligated to spit out a blessing.
To understand why this is such a radical departure from historical Christianity, the sources point us back to the year 1518 and Martin Luther's Heidelberg Disputation.
Let's dig into that.
Luther drew a sharp contrast between two completely different ways of viewing the world. The prosperity gospel aligns perfectly with what he called the theology of glory.
The theology of glory.
A theologian of glory tries to perceive God's favor through human reasoning, moral effort, and visible material success. It is a philosophy of up and to the right. If you are rich and healthy, it is visible proof that God loves you.
And Luther contrasted that with the theology of the cross.
Exactly. The theology of the cross does the exact opposite. It calls a thing what it actually is. It confronts reality head on.
Meaning it doesn't sugarcoat things.
Right. Instead of bypassing pain or pretending life is an uninterrupted upward trajectory of victory, it acknowledges suffering, grief, and weakness. It maintains that the divine is actually found in the very midst of that suffering, not just in the avoidance of it.
And the sources trace the roots of this glory mindset even further back to ancient Pelagianism.
Yes, a 5th century heresy.
Right, which basically argued that human nature is essentially uncorrupted, meaning we have the innate power to choose moral perfection entirely on our own without needing divine grace.
Fast forward to Charles Finney's 19th century revivalism, and you see this idea morph again. Finney treated spiritual revival like a science.
Like a formula.
Exactly. If you just pulled the right levers, used the right emotional music, applied the right psychological pressure, you could manufacture a spiritual outcome. It all boils down to humans believing they can pull the levers of the universe.
But when you build a system entirely on humans, pulling the levers and guaranteeing a positive outcome, you inevitably reach a devastating psychological failure point.
You really do.
I mean, what happens to you if you are sitting in one of these transactional health and wealth churches when real life inevitably hits? The formula dictates that your faith should equal blessings, but your reality is that you just received a cancer diagnosis, or you lost your job, or you are suffering from debilitating clinical depression.
The psychological toll at that intersection is staggering. We have a compelling UK study in our sources by Christopher E.M. Lloyd examining evangelical Christians dealing with mental distress.
And what did he find?
Lloyd's research shows that when mental illness occurs in these specific systems, the community often employs a tactic called negative spiritualization.
In other words, because their theology demands that faith always equals health, the presence of your illness, especially a mental illness, must be your fault.
Yes.
Your depression is attributed solely to demonic oppression, a secret unrepented sin, a generational curse, or simply a lack of faith.
And the study introduces a specific academic term for what this does to a human being: individualization.
Individualization. I've never heard that term before. What exactly does individualization mean in this context?
Well, it refers to the stripping away of your complex humanity. So in a healthy framework, professionals look at the biopsychosocial context of a person.
Meaning the biological, psychological, and social factors.
Exactly. They consider the actual biology and chemistry of your brain, your psychological history and past trauma, and your social environment. Individualization ignores all of that. It reduces your entire existence to a binary spiritual battleground.
So if you are told that your clinical anxiety is actually a demon you invited into your life, you are going to experience profound cognitive dissonance.
Tremendous dissonance.
Because you are trying to hold two completely contradictory beliefs at the same time. God promises me healing if I just have enough faith, and I am still suffering, so I must be terribly broken, deeply sinful, or entirely rejected by God.
And the fallout of that dissonance is toxic shame. The sources discuss the rise of religious trauma syndrome stemming from this exact dynamic. People are forced to suppress their authentic emotions, pretending to be healed just to fit into the church culture, while quietly deteriorating inside.
And that deterioration is compounded by a dangerous rejection of secular medical help.
This is where it gets really dangerous.
Lloyd's study highlights the heartbreaking reality that many individuals in these environments are actively discouraged from seeing therapists or psychiatrists. They are pressured to stop taking their antidepressants and told to just pray harder.
Or worse.
Yeah, they are subjected to uninvited forced exorcisms and deliverance ministries to expel the supposed demons of depression.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this rejection of the medical biopsychosocial model isn't just a matter of ignorance. It is a highly effective defense mechanism.
How so?
A narcissistic system must protect its theology of glory at all costs. If the leadership admits that a faithful, dedicated believer can suffer from a biological mental illness that requires medication, their entire transactional formula breaks down.
The illusion of their guaranteed success shatters.
Exactly. So they sacrifice the vulnerable human being to protect the theology.
So what does this all mean? When you look at the devastating effects of this retribution principle, this rigid idea that good behavior equals immediate material blessing and bad behavior equals suffering, you have to ask, do the ancient biblical texts actually support this transactional view of the universe?
Interestingly enough, this is where the ancient texts actually provide a brilliant and highly disruptive counter-narrative. The sources point us to the wisdom literature, specifically Psalm 73.
Okay, let's look at that.
It was written by a man named Asaph, who was a temple choir leader. And Asaph experienced a profound, agonizing crisis of faith.
He looked around and saw the exact opposite of the prosperity gospel, didn't he?
He really did. He saw the wicked, the arrogant, and the cruel living remarkably healthy, wealthy lives. He writes that they suffer no pain, their bodies are healthy and sleek, and they seem entirely free from the burdens that constantly plague regular people.
Oh.
Meanwhile, Asaph is trying his hardest to live a righteous life, and he feels like he is being punished and suffering constantly. He nearly abandons his faith entirely, writing that he wonders if he has cleansed his heart in vain.
How does he resolve that tension? Because, life still looks exactly like that today.
The resolution doesn't come through a tidy theological formula or a sudden influx of cash. The text says he enters the sanctuary of God. He shifts his perspective from the temporal to the eternal.
Okay.
He realizes that the material wealth of the wicked is actually an illusion. He calls their success a slippery place. Temporal success is incredibly fragile and fleeting.
So his definition of prosperity changes.
Asaph's massive revelation is a complete redefinition of what prosperity actually is. He realizes that true prosperity isn't a lack of suffering, and it isn't an abundance of money. True prosperity is simply the enduring, sustaining presence of the Creator in the very midst of the chaos.
Which perfectly sets up the ultimate biblical deconstruction of the prosperity gospel, the book of Job.
Oh, absolutely.
For those unfamiliar, Job is a wealthy, righteous man who loses absolutely everything. His health, his wealth, his children, in a catastrophic series of events. And then his three friends show up to comfort him.
Comfort in air quotes.
Right, because these friends act exactly like modern theologians of glory.
Job's friends rigidly defend the retribution principle. They look at Job sitting in the ashes, covered in painful sores, and they conclude that because God is just, Job must be hiding some terrible secret sin.
Blaming the victim.
Exactly. They relentlessly demand that he confess to this hypothetical sin so that God will restore his wealth. They are desperately trying to force the mystery of human suffering into a clean, predictable, mathematical equation.
And Job completely refuses to play along.
He does not accept it.
He sits there and insists he hasn't done anything to deserve this level of tragedy. He gets incredibly angry. He actually accuses God of arbitrary violence and injustice.
And here's the shocking detail from the text. At the end of the book, God speaks from a whirlwind, and he actually condemns the friends with their neat, tidy theological formulas, and he vindicates Job.
Wait, really? God praises the guy who angrily accused him and punishes the guys who tried to defend him with a formula.
Yes. God says to the friends, "You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Job is vindicated because his raw, agonizing, deeply honest lament proved that his faith was an authentic relationship. The friends reduce God to a vending machine, put in good behavior, get out blessings. Job, even in his blistering anger, directed his questions to God. He refused to sanitize his grief or accept a superficial, gaslighting answer. He embraced the messy reality of the mystery.
It completely destroys the idea that you have to pretend everything is fine to be spiritual. We see this exact same thread in the New Testament with the Apostle Paul's thorn in the flesh in 2 Corinthians 12.
Yeah.
Paul has some sort of severe chronic affliction. He begs God 3 different times to miraculously take it away, and God says no. God tells him, "My power is perfected in weakness." It is the ultimate theology of weakness, and it completely reverses the prosperity ethic.
This raises an important question, though. If the biblical text so deeply values weakness, honest lament, and complexity, how do victims of these toxic, narcissistic systems that demand perfection and visible success actually heal?
Because you can't just flip a switch after being spiritually abused and told your depression is a demon.
No, you can't. Chuck DeGroat offers a framework for recovery modeled on the ancient biblical Exodus narrative. It is a journey that happens in 3 distinct stages.
Let's walk through those.
First, you have to leave Egypt. You have to recognize that the narcissistic system is enslaving you, and you must physically or emotionally remove yourself from its jurisdiction.
But getting yourself out of Egypt is only half the battle. If I'm understanding DeGroat's framework, getting Egypt out of your own psyche is the real challenge, which must be what the second stage, the wilderness, is all about.
That's spot on. The wilderness is a period of intense psychological survival. It is not a quick fix. It requires bringing all of the emotions you stuffed into Robert Bly's invisible bag out into the light.
Unpacking the bag.
Yes. It requires grieving the community you lost, processing the severe cognitive dissonance of the theology you were taught, and often engaging in trauma-informed clinical therapy to undo the damage of toxic shame and spiritual surveillance.
It's a slow, difficult, and often painful deconstruction of the false god you were conditioned to serve. So if the wilderness is about deconstructing that toxic mindset and surviving the fallout, the final stage, the promised land, must be about trying to rebuild a healthy identity from scratch.
The Promised Land isn't a magical utopia where suffering ceases to exist. It is a place of inner freedom. It is reaching a state of integrated health where the biological, psychological, social, and spiritual aspects of who you are finally honored as a complete package. It's rediscovering a divine presence that sits with you in your suffering, rather than a transactional force you constantly have to manipulate for survival.
It's calling a thing what it actually is.
Yes.
What an intense journey. We started today looking at the ego-driven traps of theological narcissism, where leaders build a religion around their own reflection and use the prosperity gospel as a tool of ultimate control.
Right.
We examined the devastating impact that individualization and negative spiritualization have on mental health of believers, turning clinical distress into a profound source of shame.
A terrible burden to place on someone.
And finally, we uncover the ancient counter-narrative, the wisdom of Asaph, the honesty of Job, the weakness of Paul, that embraces suffering, nuance, and the beautifully messy reality of being human.
It serves as a vital reminder that true, enduring growth almost always happens in the spaces where we are most vulnerable, not where we are most visibly successful.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with one final thought to mull over on your own. We've talked deeply about how these toxic, narcissistic systems thrive in religious environments because they offer people simple, transactional, vending machine answers to the terrifying chaos of human suffering.
Simple answers to complex problems.
Exactly. But take a step back and look at our broader modern culture's absolute obsession with life hacks, overnight success routines, and instant gratification. Is it possible that our cultural demand for quick fixes is actually making us more vulnerable to narcissistic leaders in all areas of our lives, from our corporate workplaces to our politics?
That is a fascinating question.
Because if we are desperate for a guarantee that we can avoid the wilderness, there will always be someone standing at a podium willing to sell us an illusion. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the sources. We'll see you next time.